All right, yeah, title kind of says all. Just a quick introduction. My name is Deidre Rodriguez. I am an astrologer, a tarot reader, and a recording artist located in Austin, Texas. And I wanted to make my YouTube debut by walking y'all through the astrology of the day I got my kidney and liver transplants. So I think I'll start off and just give some context behind the situation. So I had mono from about mid-July of 2023 to about mid-August of 2023. And I picked this up, the only place I can think that I got it was because I was silly enough to share a microphone at a Nancy Griffith tribute event about a month prior. So I guess that was on me. I'll never do that again. But you know, if you've had mono during that time, everything kind of hurts, you're exhausted. So, you know, I was taking aspirin to kind of help with the lymph node issues and all that stuff. It's also fair to mention that I was a collegiate athlete. I eat very clean. Otherwise an incredibly healthy person. No family history of any sort of, you know, physical health either. You know, no issues there that I know of. And there was actually a period of about a day or two where I felt fine. I had recovered, so I thought, from mono, and I went out and had dinner with, you know, my partner, and we had a good time. And then that night at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I wake up in liver failure. So then this kicks off this like 6-month journey of unfortunately me being in the hospital. So I go to the hospital because I'm obviously in extreme pain. I'm army crawling to the bathroom. Lots of things coming out of orifices where they shouldn't be coming out of, if you catch my drift. And so I would then spend the next 4 or 5 months in the hospital. I was put on dialysis almost immediately. I had a bunch of bouts of internal bleeding, many biopsies. I mean, just the whole 9 yards. Pretty much anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, with the exception of like heart failure. So it was definitely a very difficult time in my life. All of this being said, you know, during this time, you know, a lot of the doctors, as well-intentioned as they might have been, you know, for months I was being told, oh, you're 27, your organs will just magically come back online, you're young, you were previously healthy, you know, we don't really know what's causing this because you don't have any autoimmune markers, but hey, you're young, you'll be fine, was kind of the consensus for that was the consensus until it wasn't. And I went to 3 different hospitals, and finally I got to the 3rd one in San Antonio, and they immediately put me on the transplant list. And I was blessed enough to get a kidney and a liver from the same donor in less than 3 days. I had to relearn how to walk because I was bedridden that entire time. I had nerve damage. I couldn't keep anything down. I was jaundiced. I lost all of my hair, and it's growing back curly now, as we can see. So that's at least, you know, silver lining. So I wouldn't officially get those operations done until I believe it was about November 23rd, 2023. That was when I got, they started with kidney, I believe, and then they did liver. Actually, don't quote me on that. I was on a lot of drugs. I don't really remember, but yeah, something along that time period is when these operations occurred. And so that's kind of what I want to talk to you from an astrological perspective today, because there's a lot of very interesting transits happening, you know, within my chart that really point towards this just huge life-altering, like, healing process. And I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. Obviously, as an occultist and astrologer, you know, I'm gonna take an interest in things like this. I can't believe I didn't look into this sooner. I actually had an NDE about 2 weeks prior to getting my transplant surgeries done, and I'll do another video on the astrology behind that, because that's also a very interesting day in terms of transits. So for those of you who are astrologers or, you know what you're looking at, I'm gonna put a screen cap of the transit bi-wheel right here at this point in the video, so that you can take a look at the transits for yourself and kind of follow along if you want to. So I'll be referencing little note cards that I wrote because yeah, with a plethora of medical conditions and chronic stuff that I deal with now, brain fog is certainly one of them, and I want to keep things as linear and as clear as possible. So the first thing that kind of stood out to me when I was taking a gander at this was the fact that both the transiting Sun and Mars were conjunct my natal Pluto in the 12th house. And so for those of you who are not up to, speed on astrological terms, essentially, a conjunction is when a planet meets up with another planet or planetary body in the sky within an orb of about 5 degrees, right? So they're basically sitting on top of each other. And that can mean several things energetically. A conjunction can really, it's typically a harmonious aspect. It tends to facilitate the flow of energy very, very well. Kind of think about like stacking coupons, I think is a good way to kind of, envision a conjunction, right? And so when you've got Sun and Mars transiting, right? So these are planets that are in the sky on the day that I was getting this operation done. Sun represents vitality, identity, the light that you exude, who you are on the inside most authentically. And Mars is a planet that is about action and primal human feelings, war, anger. It's named after Mars, the deity of war. So that kind of gives you some perspective on what those two planets represent. Well, the Sun is a planetary body, but whatever. And then having it being conjunct my natal Pluto, which Pluto is, underworld, purgatory, death, rebirth, things kind of that nature. It makes a lot of sense that, my vitality. And then as an Aries, with 4 Aries placements, as you saw in my chart, Mars is a major player for me. So wherever Mars is I'm going to feel that a lot because I have 4 placements in Aries, 4 significant placements in Aries. And all in the 4th house too, which is, as you can, again, if you're following along, you can see that Aries stellium down there in my 4th house, which is right there, kind of the deepest point of the chart, right? So that's sometimes where you would look if you wanted to see about a situation that could maybe be life-threatening or kind of invoke some feeling of, of dying, if for lack of a better word, in the literal or in the spiritual sense. And to add insult to injury, this is all happening again in the 12th house, which is the house of, I kind of call it spiritual purgatory because it's not fully the end, but it's not the beginning of the 1st house either. So it's kind of like this subconscious, dreamscape, hidden kind of thing. That's kind of what the 12th house represents. And so when you've got Sun and Mars conjunct Pluto in the 12th house, Pluto being kind of like destruction, like I was saying, and the Sun, vitality, Mars, fighting and action and primal kind of things. When you're going under the knife, quite literally under surgery, you're fighting for your life, and so Pluto, again, my body was destroyed during this process. If YouTube wasn't sensitive about, images, I would show you some, but I looked really bad. I looked like I was on death's door, and I very much so was. So that really makes a lot of sense there to see like the Sun and the Mars kind of conjunct Pluto over there in the 12th house, and kind of just, understanding how my vitality and my life force was so severely impacted by what was going on. And Mars being right there as I am literally fighting for my life. Pluto, again, kind of playing in there with that, that subconscious like death, decay, destruction kind of vibe, as I am fighting against that. And so when you've got Pluto conjunct those two, the Sun and Mars, thankfully, I think that having the Sun and Mars conjunct Pluto kind of helped the effects, like the decay effects of Pluto not quite have the usual oomph, that it would usually have if it was perhaps just the Sun or just Mars conjunct Pluto. But that was the first thing that kind of stood out to me. It was just like that insane conjunction over there in the 12th house. And so just for my astrology people, I am referencing a pretty liberal orb here when I'm talking about oppositions or, in any of the aspects, right? Because this did occur over a pretty decent amount of time. So I'm a little bit more willing to recognize a conjunction or a trine or an opposition in a little bit more of an expanded way rather than it needing to be within like that typical like 3 to 5 degree orb. So I think just keep that in mind as we're working our way through this absolutely insane chart. So the other one I wanted to take a look at is Chiron, which is an asteroid. It's not a planet. It's not a luminary, the sun or the moon. It's an asteroid. And so Chiron was almost exactly conjunct my south node, my natal south node, right? So Chiron is transiting over that 4th house south node in Aries, right? And, you know, for those of you that don't know, Aries is a sign that tends to rule over knives, cutting, scalpels, so therefore surgery. You know, cutting into the skin is very much so an Aries kind of trait, a Martian kind of trait. When you see Mars or Aries involved somewhere, or sometimes even Scorpio, since they share that planetary rulership, you know, you can see a lot of, you know, war, knives, cutting, like severed ties, things kind of that nature. And I bring this up because, not necessarily because the South Node really means a whole hell of a lot about, like, you know, fighting for your life and surgery and all that stuff. But for me, as somebody that works a lot with ancestors and, you know, those that came before me, this felt relevant because I did draw from that a lot while I was in this situation. And so I think it was very healing for me to be able to kind of fall back on family and my roots, and understanding that, you know, everyone in my lineage at some point, you know, in all of our lineages, but, you know, since we're talking about this specific chart, in my lineage has really gone through a lot in their lives. You know, like my parents and me are kind of the first, you know, generations to really not truly struggle, you know, and I say that even after going through what I went through. I mean, I'm very lucky to still be alive and to even be able to, you know, afford and get ahead of whatever this was and walk out, you know, definitely, you know, a little scathed, but for the most part, I'm doing okay. You know what I mean? But just being able to draw on that ancestral strength and those ancestral prayers and having that connection while I was in such a debilitated state was something that was very healing and very empowering for me at the same time, which I think, you know, get that aspect, that empowering aspect of Chiron maybe gets a little bit overlooked sometimes in favor of the, you know, the wound aspect of it, because it's the wounded healer. So it not only talks about your wounds, but how you heal and recover from them. And so I think that that is something that is relevant to me, is I was able to really, you know, have a community of people that I consider family to rely upon while I was in this state of just, I couldn't do anything for myself. And I'm also going to talk about my natal sun and natal Mars this time, because transiting Chiron was sitting right there in my 4th house, touching on, you know, Mars, touching on my sun. You know, my Mars natally is at 12 degrees. Chiron was coming in at 15, and my sun is at 20 degrees. So again, loose orb here, but still relevant because it would have touched on both of those things within this general time frame. But yeah, again, sun being vitality, Mars being fighting for your life, and Chiron being the wounded healer. And how am I recovering that vitality? What am I doing to kind of fight back against this thing, this unknown force that's just taking over my body and making me so sick? And kind of again referencing that stuff at the beginning with the 12th house, where transiting Mars and the sun were over there. I think having that solidified, you know, foundation of having my natal sun and my natal Mars being supported by transiting Chiron, I think that really played a role in giving me a bit of an energetic one-up or an edge on, you know, stuff that could have very easily like ended my existence. Chiron's involved a lot here because I have another one for you. Chiron, transiting Chiron was opposing my natal Chiron. And this is extra interesting because my natal Chiron is in Libra. And which part of the body does Libra rule? The kidneys. And I was getting a kidney transplant. I was getting a liver transplant as well. But, you know, kidney was, I think, the driving, is, and it still is, the driving factor in my healing journey and just keeping myself healthy. Because if the kidneys go, everything else kind of craps out as well. And so an opposition is another type of aspect that is when planets or planetary bodies are kind of sitting opposite each other in a natal chart. And you'll see, I'll put the image up here too. You can kind of see how they're sitting like this. Like you've got natal Chiron up here, and transiting Chiron down here, and they're sitting opposite each other. It's not exact, but it is within, you know, a 5-degree orb. It's my natal Chiron, or I'm sorry, my natal Chiron is at 10 degrees, transiting Chiron 15 degrees. So that still counts, if you ask me. But, you know, having that, just that crazy connection with Libra and the kidneys, and then Aries being, you know, surgery and cutting, and literally having someone else's kidneys being put into my body at this exact moment when the transiting Chiron is opposite my, you know, wounded healer is opposite my natal Chiron, is just, that was another one that kind of blew my mind, especially with those bodily references to the kidneys. That's kind of crazy to me. Like the Chiron opposite Chiron kind of gives me a little bit of a chuckle as well, because that's one of the most literal interpretations I've ever seen of an aspect in a natal chart ever in my years of looking at natal charts. So a little funny there for my astrology people. Another somewhat literal transit / aspect that I noticed was that Neptune, or transiting Neptune, was conjunct my natal lot of fortune. And for those of you that don't know what the lot of fortune is, the lot of fortune is largely considered the most abundant or luckiest part in someone's natal chart. It's not really a planet or an asteroid or anything. It's a specific point in the chart, and there's a whole way to calculate it and all that, but you'll have to Google that because I'm not going to go into that right now. But it represents how you get blessings, but also how you lose them. And in this case, thankfully, it was how I received blessings. And so Neptune being conjunct that lot of fortune, you know, I think I was very much so somebody, I have very strange reactions to anesthetic. And this was very much so brought to light during the months in the hospital. I was waking up during biopsies, you know, waking up when I shouldn't have. I felt a lot of things that I shouldn't have felt, surgically speaking, medically speaking. And so I think I got very lucky that the anesthetic worked the way it was supposed to for this specific surgery, because that could have gone very, very, very far south had it not. And I say that Neptune is related to anesthetic because Neptune is this planet of just like, you know, it's kind of this dreamscape, and the quote unquote unevolved, you know, aspect or energy of Neptune would be just like getting lost in, you know, escapism, drug use, things kind of that nature. But thankfully, you know, this was a little bit more of the positive aspect of it. I just referenced the drug aspect of Neptune because of the anesthetic that I was under. I really don't, like I was saying earlier, I don't really remember a whole lot between, you know, the 3 days probably that these surgeries took place. In very Aries fashion, I was told this story about how, from my partner who was present, you know, in between the operations. And she said that I was intubated and all this, had all my IVs and things like that. And in the middle of the in between the surgeries, I was trying to speak and pull out the tubes and unplug myself, so much so that they had to like strap me to the bed because I would not behave even under anesthetic. So, you know, again, typical Aries, makes a lot of sense. So again, this is a very loose orb, very liberal orb, but Neptune was also at 24 degrees. And my natal IC is at 0 degrees Aries. And so that is the deepest part of one's chart, the IC. And Neptune, again, veils spirituality, you know, hidden experiences. Well, not really hidden, but just shrouded is a better word. You know, it's kind of like walking around either in a meditative state or feeling like you've taken Benadryl, depending on the person. And sometimes you look to the IC when you want to see how, you know, it's a point in the chart where sometimes you would look to see how you might leave this world. And in a way, I kind of did, because there was a machine breathing for me and kind of keeping my heart going underneath such a strong anesthetic. I mean, they're replacing organs. You need to be knocked out for that. And this next one is less something that was directly affecting or impacting my chart, and more so just like this collective energy shift, because I'm looking and it seems like Saturn had just shifted into Pisces on or around that day because it was sitting at 0 degrees. 0 degrees is an important degree in astrology because it signifies the beginning of a new cycle, especially with Saturn involved. Saturn is such an important planet in, you know, in astrology. It represents karma and time and lessons and, you know, duration and things kind of like that, and foundations. you know? And so when you've got Saturn in Pisces, you know, it just represents like this new cycle that's starting and beginning in terms of, you know, spirituality, but also just, you know, for me, you know, there is a distinct before and after this day for me in my life. I reference it all the time. The before is, you know, kind of like my idea of a BCE, right? There's AD and BC. Well, there's BC is everything that happened before my transplants, and, you know, AD is everything that's going to that's happening now and will continue to happen post-transplant, you know. So I thought that was an interesting observation as well, just to kind of see that 0 degree Saturn in Pisces, you know, coming out to play. And this is all, for the record, honestly, for my astrology people, this is all pre-Saturn return, by the way. I'm in my Saturn return right now. My Saturn is at 0 degrees Aries. So this was not, you know, this was nothing to do with my Saturn return yet at this point. So thankfully mine so far has been very good and very expansive and very healing. So very grateful for that. I think another helpful aspect that was going on, or in transit that was going on around this time, was that the sun was trining my natal Saturn and my Imum Coeli. I'm fairly certain that's how you say that, the IC that I was talking about earlier. I really had to stop the video and Google how to say that because I've only ever read it in books. So a trine, like I was telling y'all about oppositions and conjunctions earlier, a trine is another aspect that's very harmonious, energy flows very well. It's something that comes very naturally, you know, so when you see a lot of, you know, trines in maybe your chart or someone else's chart, it's energy that just flows very easily. There's not a whole hell of a lot that's stopping it from, you know, doing its job. And so when the sun was trining my natal Saturn and Imum Coeli, you know, adding some more vitality, that sun vitality to these, you know, these planets that were maybe a little heavier, right? So we've got Saturn being kind of restrictive at times. And for me, especially, as, you know, I have a lot of Capricorn energy in my chart as well. And so Saturn is a big player for me in addition to Mars. You know, lucky me, I get both of the malefics. But, you know, natal Saturn there is kind of just like talking about, you know, it's sitting there at the lowest point of my chart, right there on the IC. And so when you've got all of this other stuff kind of happening in that 4th house IC area, and then you've got the sun trining the foundation there, Saturn, that really helps things kind of not be as bad as they could have been. Obviously, they were still really bad considering the situation, but I think that sun and that aspect of vitality and strength and light kind of flowing nicely into that foundation, it really set me up for a lot of, you know, energetic success, all things considered. The last thing that I wanted to bring up was, again, this is kind of a really loose and very liberal interpretation of a conjunction, but, you know, I'm referencing back now to my chart. So there is this point in the sky, this fixed star, and it's called Algol. And Algol is kind of represented by the story of Medusa, so it kind of tends to be a very chaotic, disruptive kind of energy. And when I had first gotten sick back in August and gone to the hospital for the first time, Algol had been a player in that day as well. And, you know, I'll do a video on that day that I first went to the hospital as well, because I think that, again, you know, very interesting stuff there at play. But, you know, Algol sits in all of our charts. If you find 26 degrees Taurus in your natal chart, that's exactly where the star Algol is sitting. And so what was approaching Algol while I was under the knife, as they say, was Uranus, which is this planet of chaos and on the visionary. So that's one of the good aspects of it. But Uranus does tend to stir some shit up. You know, it tends to stir the pot a little bit, and it can be very chaotic and unexpected as well. And there is definitely something very unexpected about this entire thing. But, you know, I think that, you know, making sure that seeing that Algol was involved yet again at kind of the, you know, the ending of this entire thing. I would be in the hospital for, you know, gosh, November, December, for almost another 3 months at this point, or 2.5 months at this point. But, you know, I think it's funny to notice how Algol was kind of a player. And I think Uranus was a player too on that first day that I went in the hospital. And here it is coming back around again when we're kind of tying up, you know, putting the bow on top, and we're starting to get into this mode of healing rather than getting sick. And so that's kind of how things ended here. So, I mean, you tell me, is that crazy or not? Or am I just kind of losing my mind and making things up out of nowhere? But that's all I got for you in this one specific video. I definitely want to make more astrology videos in regards to my medical situation, because there was a lot of experiences that I had, guys, and the stars definitely reflected that back to me. And as somebody that sees a lot of value in astrology, in the occult, and anything kind of adjacent to that, spirituality, you know, I think that it's important to kind of find ourselves and to find strength and, you know, get through life's toughest battles, you know, using the tools that we know how to use. So, you know, thank you so much for sitting in and listening to me chit chat about the crazy stuff that was going on in the sky when I was dying. But, you know, I'm happy to be alive and happy to be here being able to talk about it with you guys. So let me know if this was interesting for you in the comments. I also, you can do readings. You can hire me for your events and your parties, and, you know, or if you want me to, you know, look at something, a very significant day in your life, in your chart, and kind of interpret it and see, you know, what we can find about why that might have happened and energetically what was supporting that instance, send me an email. You can find that in my channel, and you can also find me on Instagram, which is also linked in my channel. But yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great Scorpio new moon.